I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. We are back with Jasmin Laine, and I wanted to get into a topic that we discussed on the show yesterday with Key and Bexy, but we have some more news to report on this one. So we're talking about the seat in Quebec that is a tie. It is really unbelievable in a democracy that you would have something this close, especially when there's 32,000 and change voting for each party. We're talking about the Liberals and the Bloc. And I want to just spend a bit more time talking about this seat and the sort of media discussion around it. So we saw, and we covered this yesterday, that there was a recount in this riding of Terrebonne, Quebec, where on election night, I believe it said that the Liberals had won, and then they did a recount, and then it was the Bloc, and then it switched back to the Liberals by one vote, only for a woman to come forth from the Bloc Quebecois saying, I voted for the Bloc, but my vote didn't count, and I have it in my hand. It was mailed back to me because of an error from Elections Canada. So this woman was caught up with by someone from the station Nouveau Info and interviewed this woman. Her name is Emmanuelle Bosset, and here she is. It's dubbed over because she's speaking in French, but dubbed into English, explaining what happened. So let's play that clip.
Emma, here is possibly the vote that could have made a difference in this election.
Well, maybe. Yes, because that's it. I voted for the Bloc, and now it's down to one vote. So maybe it matters more than we think, that little envelope. But
why is this vote in your hands and not at the polling station?
That's a good question. There is a mistake in the postal code. So I think that's why it was redirected to me.
Because you were voting by mail. Did they give you that envelope at Elections Canada?
I didn't write the address here. It's really Elections Canada that provides this envelope like this with the little sticker. I just had to write my return address here, fill out my vote, put it in the mail. The stamp is already paid.
So it is really unbelievable. I just want to read this from the CBC story because this just shows how remarkable this story is. So on election night, Terrebonne initially went to Auguste by 35 votes. She's the Liberal challenger. So it was a Bloc-held seat. The Liberal challenger won by 35 votes. After the standard validation process, the result flipped to the incumbent Bloc Quebecois MP by 44 votes. So that was a flip of some 79 votes, which triggered an automatic judicial recount. And then the judicial recount came back with the Libs up by one vote, only again to find this one vote that this woman claims that she didn't get counted, not because of her own mistake, but because of something Elections Canada did. And so to me, Jasmin, when I look at this, I just think that something is up. Something is a little fishy. And I get that the Liberals are just salivating over this narrative. Like they really, really want Conservatives to lean into like election denial, anything that's like tangentially related to Donald Trump and what happened in the US in 2020. They want it to happen, right? They're fanning the flames. They want the conspiracy theories. They want Conservatives to come out and say, oh my goodness, this is just not right. Just so that they did this during the campaign. We had Sam Cooper on talking about how it was partially a Chinese election interference scheme where the Communist Party had put this idea out to try to paint Canadian Conservatives as Trumpy. And that was uncovered by CSIS. It was actually the Liberal government was warned about it. And to me, it's like they're playing this up because they want the conspiracies. And the idea is that there is a problem here. There is an issue with our election integrity when votes can swing that much. We're going to get through a couple more of the details, but tell me your initial thoughts on this story.
Well, I first have to say something kind of irrelevant to this story, but in terms of that memo from CSIS that has since been leaked, I do think it's awfully interesting that the Liberal Party was warned about that, and I believe it was 2021, and then instead of saying, ooh, this is a really big problem, they said, oh, that's actually a really good idea. We should do that in our next election, too. And lo and behold. But in terms of this riding, you know, I do think it's interesting that there's only one individual who has come forward saying, I got this sent back to me. You can bet your bottom there's probably many more who just wouldn't make it public or perhaps wouldn't know. And so, you know, obviously there's going to need to be a by-election there. I think even just the probability of the difference being by one single vote is so incredibly rare. One of the biggest things that's interesting, though, is that, you know, there were in that riding when they had done the recount, there were 74 ballots that were newly validated and 63 of those were originally rejected, which is where my biggest question comes in being, okay, well, so if they were rejected because of some sort of an error on it, somebody writing something else on the paper, whatever, why are they suddenly now counting? And also, there were 11 new ballots that came seemingly out of absolutely nowhere. And it is quite frustrating that we have no response to that. And I think just in general, we saw a really big problem with spoiled ballots, rejected ballots this election. And there are always quite a few. But, in my polling station, as an example, there were no signs. There was nobody telling me what would make a rejected or spoiled ballot. I'm aware that they do have details on electionscanada.ca, but let's be real, there's a lot of people who won't go and check that, right? So I think in general, there's people who will send a message, certainly, and that can affect the vote. But there's also a lot of people who maybe just didn't know. And I think Elections Canada, if you want to have this integrity-based system that you want to brag about so much, you should probably be spending a lot more money ensuring that people actually understand how the system works, understand what they're doing, whether or not they want to send a message and they're okay with that spoiled ballot. And this case, as a whole, in terms of all of the rejections, I think it does open up a very big discussion towards that. And in terms of the integrity of this riding, obviously there's some very interesting things that are it's pretty hard to get out of your head once you start looking into them. But at the end of the day, with how much the government funds the bureaucracy in order to operate the government, Elections Canada hired roughly 200,000 people to help with this election. You would think with that many people, there would certainly be a lot more oversight. To miss details like that, fix them, sorry. And so to me, this really comes down to, this isn't so much about some big conspiracy theory as it is to absolute competence. And I'm very curious how many more people we may or may not see coming forward with their returned ballot in the mail because something went wrong and it was just a massive error by Elections Canada.
Right. Well, I mean, to that point, right? The person that we saw in that clip, she's obviously a fairly sophisticated political person, right? She understood what had happened. And as soon as the results came back tied, she said, well, wait a minute. And she knew how to get her message out. To your point, there could have been dozens or hundreds of more people that had happened to, but they simply didn't understand. Like maybe they thought, oh, okay, they counted my vote and then they mailed it back to me, I
Yeah,
guess. Or
totally.
or they just, oh, junk mail, throw it in the bin and never get to it. Now, you said that there's a couple of facts about this writing that once you get in your head, you can't get out. I think this might be some of the things you're referring to. This was on X from an account called Election Watcher. So he tracked what the changes were in the votes because, like I said, there was the validation where it flipped and then there was the recount where it flipped again. So this is the seats, the votes for each party and how they went. So first for the validation, the Liberals gained 0. The Bloc gained 79 votes at validation. The Conservatives gained 18 votes. The NDP 0, Green -5, PPC -18. And then next, at the recount, this is kind of reversed, right? The Libs got 56 more votes at recount, the Bloc 11, the Conservatives 5, the NDP 4, the Greens lost 2 at the recount. Like, what is going on? How do you just gain and lose votes like this? And then, 63 votes were rejected at the recount. I would like to see a picture of all those ballots, please. I would like to see a scanned picture of each one and an explanation as to why 63, when you have a riding that was decided by just one vote and 63 were rejected after the fact on the third round of voting, you're going to have to give me some more evidence from that. Next, we have Marty up north asking what is going on in Quebec. So let me just explain this graph to the audience here. This is the percentage of rejected ballots by riding. And it goes across the country from west to east. And so you can just imagine, the provinces on the western side of the country, British Columbia, Alberta, and Manitoba, Saskatchewan over here, Ontario. And then all of a sudden, this bit right here, that would be Quebec. That would be Quebec. And you can see how many more ballots were rejected. So why are they rejecting way more ballots in Quebec than the rest of the country? I mean, these are the kinds of things that really do, I'm not one for conspiracy theories, but when you look at the data and the facts, and it just doesn't make sense, there has to be an explanation. What do you think?
Well, I think at the end of the day as well, Elections Canada, let's say that there actually were that many rejected ballots. You would think in a democracy of which you want to have transparency and openness to your people, that a situation like that, and this happens every election. This election is quite significant, though, in terms of the numbers of rejected ballots, the numbers of ridings being flipped. I mean, typically, on average, I would say there's maybe 1 to 2 ridings that get flipped in recounts, because recounts happen. And this election has been very interesting in that regard. And of course, sure, it was a very tight race in some areas, but you would think that Elections Canada would say to themselves, oof, for lack of better words, we have a lot of dumb people voting, or we have a lot of people who really want to send a message, and they could actually be hurting the party that they want to be supporting. You would think that there would be something of that, and they would say, okay, guys, clearly you don't remember how to vote because, it's been since what? I remember doing a little practice voting session when I was in grade 6. It's been a while, and we don't have elections very often. So here, we're going to, on top of all of these other campaigns and ads that we're running, we're going to also include in there, this is what it looks like. And I do think as well, when it comes to voting and you're a registered voter, I'm not totally opposed. No, that's a lie. I am actually. In theory, if we could do this without Elections Canada having your personal information, I would love it if there was a way where they could be like, here was your vote, it got rejected, and here's why. And you get a little slip in the mail. But of course, I don't want them to have the information of everybody and what party they voted for. But it'd be nice in theory to have something like that, because I do think that this comes down much more to something seems weird, and if somebody has to explain to you why it's not weird and has to shame you because you think it's weird, that's probably because you might be in the right direction, I find. And I'm not saying that there's anything conspiratorial about this. At the very least, it's odd, and it's completely right to question that. It's completely right. It's your democratic right to question that, to criticize the system. And I wish that there was more. I wish that there was more focus on this, and more focus, from people who were a part of the committees that were going through ballots that were rejected, and suddenly now they count, or they counted and suddenly now they're rejected. We do need to have a lot more transparency and communication on that front, but I highly doubt that's going to happen, because instead it ends up being another pawn in the Liberal game where they can just shame everybody who wants to question something that's perfectly open to being questioned, because as you've said, it's very odd.
Well, of course it is. I mean, and we didn't even get to the fact that they found over 800 special ballots that were not counted out in British Columbia and Port Moody because the guy forgot to mail them in, or whatever the explanation was. I mean, when there's this many data points and proof points that something wasn't right, yes, Canadians have every right to demand answers. And let me remind you, because I mean, this is a while ago now. I had to explain the story to my producers because they're quite young and they weren't paying attention. But back in 2011, when Stephen Harper won his majority, the legacy media promoted a years-long conspiracy theory that the election had been stolen and cheated away because of the so-called robocall scandal. They imagined that there was a national campaign to call people up and tell them that their polling station had changed, and that untold numbers of Canadians went to the wrong place and couldn't vote because of this. The journalists promoted the story. There were hundreds and hundreds of articles that were written accusing the Conservatives of stealing the election denial before Trump even did it, right? And this was being peddled by the Ottawa Citizen and mainstream media journalists, including the CBC, who promoted this conspiracy over and over and over again, to the point where they did a national inquiry into it. And lo and behold, there was no evidence and no wrongdoing, and it was closed. It was not a national conspiracy. So when the Conservatives win, the legacy media is more than happy to push the conspiracies and to accuse the Conservatives of stealing the election. And yet here we are, where there's just a whole bunch of really mysterious things that have happened. And if anyone talks about it, they will point to you and call you an election denier. I'm talking, of course, about the CBC. So the CBC writes his hit piece. Here it is. Conservatives' fundraising email suggests that the Liberals are trying to tip the scales in the recount. So Elections Canada Act sets out when recounts happen and how they can proceed. And they are very mad at the Conservative Party for sending an email to their followers saying that something is not right here. So let me just read a bit from the story for you, Jasmin. It says, a Conservative Party fundraising email alleges the Liberals are trying to tip the scales in riding recounts. Language political watchers say is concerning. As some Canadians say they don't trust the results of last week's election. The email sent to the Conservatives mailing list on Wednesday solicits donations to help us hold the line. As recounts play out, the Liberals are working to flip just enough seats to edge closer to majority. We can't let that happen, reads the email. If we don't act fast, we risk losing the gains we made on election night. It concludes by saying the Liberals are fighting hard to tip the scales. And then the CBC goes into total defense mode and just starts talking about how there's nothing to see here, everything's fine, this is all according to protocol, nothing to see here, and shame on the Conservatives for using basically Trumpy language. Well, I'm sorry, but there is something amok here. And if the Conservatives want to send this out to their list to try to fundraise so that they can have more scrutineers, right? Like, this is the other thing. On election night, there's thousands of volunteers across the country that go and they're scrutineers and they watch the vote counts happen. But then after that, they go back to their lives, right? They go back to the real world and they don't have time to just volunteer for a political party. And so when all of these recounts are happening, there isn't necessarily Conservative volunteers in every single riding watching it. So if the Conservatives want to say, hey, help us raise some money so that we can get people into these places, we can get lawyers to oversee it and whatever else, that's their prerogative. And for the CBC to sort of jump in and say, how dare these people fundraise off of this, and it's spreading misinformation and all their favorite buzzwords. I mean, again, we could talk about the CBC on every episode of the Candice Malcolm Show, but this is just, again, the example of how the CBC just hates the Conservatives, hates everything they stand for, and will find any excuse to write a hit piece about them.
Yeah, it is. It's again, you actually pointed it out so brilliantly there, where if you just flipped who we were talking about, the rhetoric would be so very different. And it's incredibly frustrating. And it's such a lie. Like, that's kind of the only way that I can put it. It's a lie with a purpose. And that purpose, unfortunately, has worked. And it's really disappointing when you have, and also too, let's keep in mind in this case, I could see perhaps some people who think that, the Conservatives sending out this message in order to try to get more fundraising is like kind of dangerous to do. I mean, sure, maybe, but also what they're wanting more fundraising for is fair and it's democratic. And yes, you need fundraising in order to survive, right? That's one of the big problems with the NDP right now and why they want to be party status again so bad. So I just think it's very frustrating. And also, perhaps this is just a little bit of a nuance, but in terms of the language there being that the Liberals are trying to tip the scales, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're accusing the Liberals of trying to meddle in anything or manipulate anything. That could very well mean that, the Liberals are running a campaign to make everybody feel against us, and we don't like that. Like, that's fair, right? Whereas I feel like CBC, the way that they discussed this in the article as well, was very much more like they were trying to insinuate that the Conservatives were calling it a rigged election, which they didn't. To accuse somebody of trying to tip the scales, that could mean a large number of different things. And I would say as well, again, that there's a lot of weird stuff with this one that seems very odd, and it is our right as Canadians to hold officials and to hold our government accountable, because when we don't, like, gosh, who knows what could happen if we suddenly just stop doing that. And so I think for me, when it comes to the CBC and the way that they omit certain details and highlight other details, I'm just very tired of what seems to just be this mass psychosis, or this attempt at creating mass psychosis, and to make people feel shamed and feel weird for having very normal thoughts when you go through the details. There's nothing radical about thinking that. It's just you're seeing things that are striking you, and you're thinking about them. And I think that that's a wonderful thing to do.
Well, and isn't the CBC curious? Like, what happened to those 63 votes? Why were they rejected at the recount? I mean, why are they writing a story
about grace?
Candice,
that's something a journalist would do.
Well, yeah, like they're totally not curious about that, but they do very much want to come after the Conservatives. Okay, so we got another email from the Conservative Party, and this is amusing. So they are fighting back and using the CBC story to fundraise even more. Good for them. They say, right now we're under attack by the media. They write, last week we asked for your help to get our top political operatives on the ground to oversee vote recounts in key ridings across the country. Every party can have people on the ground to ensure the recounts are done right and to make sure the process is fair and transparent. went. And let's be clear, we're not questioning the results, but we want the recounts to be fair and accurate. But now the media is attacking us or twisting our words and trying to get us to back off simply for covering this. The CBC was quick to put out this article accusing us of nefarious activities, and then they show the same headline. And basically, again, it says chip in to help us. We'll never back down. Okay, this is good. This is good. But this is a part that is sort of like a pet peeve of mine. It says, let's be clear, we're not questioning the results. We just want the recounts to be fair and accurate. From my perspective, like, why aren't you questioning the results? Like, the results are fishy. There's some shenanigans going on. There, 67, I mean, a normal recount wouldn't just swing 70 votes one way or another and then end up with the Liberals winning by 1 vote. I mean, we shouldn't accept the results of that riding. We shouldn't. And I think you're right. We will probably end up going to a by-election because it will be challenged, because you can't have this as a result that stands. And to repeat something I said on the show yesterday, I think the Liberals are trying to steal a majority, right? On election night, they lost the majority. They have a minority government. They had, I think on election night, it was like 168, and now they're up to 170. They only need 171, really, plus a speaker to get a majority. So they're almost there. They just need to get like 1 or 2 people to cross the floor. That is a stolen majority. They didn't get the majority on election night, and they're trying to get it by other means. I think it's perfectly fine to point that out and to say it, and the Conservatives shouldn't back down and say, oh, no, don't worry, we're not questioning the results. We just want to make sure that everything's fair. No, you have to fight. You have to push. And, I like the idea that they're pointing this out and fundraising on it, but I wish they would go even harder.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And again, I think more than anything, to simply just be true to yourself and what you think. It's something I've talked about this on my show plenty of times. I did in yesterday's episode as well. But, one of the reasons why Donald Trump was so successful, why he was so good in his campaigning, despite everything against him in that regard. And you don't have to like Donald Trump in order to acknowledge this. But the American people voted for him en masse in ways that nobody predicted, that everybody was saying wouldn't happen. And why is that? Because Donald Trump didn't care. He didn't care what the media was going to say. He didn't care what his opponents were going to say. He just said what was on his mind. Sometimes a little too much, but in general, he just said what was on his mind. And I think that we need to get back to that. And if there's any advice that I can give to the Conservative Party, and I have given this to many people who I'm aware of and friends with, or not necessarily friends, but acquaintances with, who are involved, it's that Conservatives really need to stop being on defense, and we need to start playing offense again. Let's stop letting everybody else create the narratives. Let's create the narratives, and let's be on offense. We need to stop being, I can't stress that enough. This whole defensive, oh, well, we're not saying this. Who cares? You don't even need to, they're going to take, you can put that in that article and they're going to take something out of it anyway to criticize you on. It doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter what you say to defend yourself. They're still running on things that are clearly false, that they use to manipulate the masses to win in this election. So you need to stop defending those things, and you need to start playing offensive. That is my best advice to everybody, really, who is in this space. And we're not in this space because we're evil, hateful people who are just crazy fringe minority conspiracy theorists. We're in this space because we live real lives and we know the damage that has been caused. And unfortunately, like people such as David Cochrane or Rosemary Barton, whose salaries are upwards of $500,000 a year plus bonuses on your taxpayer dollar, we don't have the luxury of being able to witness our economy dwindling. We don't have the luxury of being able to witness the division that has been so articulate, I'm going to use that word even though it doesn't make sense, but so articulately put in place by media, by the parties, while they go and accuse everybody else of doing exactly what it is that they're doing. Like, we don't have the luxury to not care about the future of our country, because we are actually just the average citizen. We are people who have businesses. We are entrepreneurs. We are people who are struggling, that's why we land in this way, because we are so sick of being lied to and manipulated and taken advantage of. And so we need to stop being defensive about how we feel, and we need to just say what we think and not be afraid of the ripple effect. And I think that advice, as long as you do so kindly, of course, it's not nice to be mean to anybody, but if you can manage to do that and be wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove in the way that you do it, I really do think that there's a lot of hope still for the direction that this country goes in, despite everything else trying to be against you, as we clearly see with the CBC on a daily basis.
No, I
End rant.
100% agree. I don't think that we should be explaining. We don't have to. We don't have to be on defense ever. And I think that's so right. I'll just share a little personal tidbit. I was on maternity leave. I was like basically a stay-at-home mom with my 4 little kids, having a great time. And I was almost reluctant to get back into journalism. And it wasn't until Justin Trudeau resigned that I just felt this like duty, basically, to come back in and start working again and start hosting my podcast. And when I was merging with the Counter Signal and we were launching Juno News, Keean Bexley asked me, he's like, you have a pretty good life. Like, why are you doing this? Why don't you just stay and be a stay-at-home mom with your kids? And I really do feel like I have a duty. Like I have to, right?
It's
Like
your moral obligation. I
I
say
really
that to
feel that
people
way.
all the time. Yeah,
But yeah,
people ask me like, "Oh, well, why do you do this?" Because, you're never going to get through to them. And I'm like, I don't care if I ever get through to them. It is my moral obligation to be true and to follow where my heart is guiding me, and to take my time and do my research and make sure that I have a very high aim and I'm on the right track, or at least I'm trying to be better, And I think that's kind of how a lot of this works. It's like if you sit back and you don't do anything about it, it's not going to be a prosperous future. That's just, we have 10 years to show the downward trend of this particular government and these particular ministers. So yeah, I
no,
totally
it's
agree with
true.
you.
It's our country and it's our future. And for me, it's my children's future as well. And I have a duty to God and a duty to do the best that I can. And I think that you're on a very similar path and trajectory. Jasmin Laine, I always really appreciate having you on the show. Thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a good chat. I like this. We should do this again sometime.
Absolutely. All right, folks, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back again tomorrow with all the news. I'm Candice Malcolm. This is the Candice Malcolm Show. Thank you and God bless.
You're watching Juno News, Canada's fastest growing independent news network. Our team works day and night to bring you nationwide coverage of the issues that matter. Honest reporting of the stories that put Canadians first. From far and wide, Juno is doing the work to turn the dial in the right direction, bringing you the news from the field and in the studio. Wherever it takes us, we get the job done. For you, for Canada. Subscribe today and help us replace the CBC. Go to junonews.com to join the fight.